Just like it says, it's showtime and great morning. Great morning, humans. Great morning, world. This would be your boy, Dr. JC Doornick, aka The Dragon. And welcome to another episode of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. Very excited to be here today. And I just want to kind of throw a little bit of a reminder as to the live component of this show, because a lot of people ask me what that's about. Because as you know, the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast is the primary goal here. We're going to record another episode of the podcast, but the question is, why do you do it live? And that's exposure therapy. You know, if you want to have some fun with transparency right now, like so many people, I struggle with anxiety, deep anxiety. And it was always centered around, imposter syndrome and all of that stuff associated with public speaking, right? So I must be masochistic because I have chosen public speaking on many, many levels, podcasting and public speaking, getting on big stages and such as my, career. So that's why I do this live. So what's in it for you is you get to be here with me as I record this podcast episode with the high chance of experiencing mistakes, right? Sound problems. I might say something wrong and have to do it again. So I just think that it's exciting, and today we are going to review another book. So this whole idea of taking Mondays and reviewing books is just kind of like me paying something forward to you, because I read about a book a week. And I've been reviewing books that I've read in the past lately, but I'm just constantly reading new books. I just love to read. Big shout out to my friend, Jim Quick. Just hung out with him. Hold on. Some of the live component right there. Hung out with him yesterday, and just once again, so much gratitude for him teaching me how to speed read, but also dramatically improve my memory recall to the point where I read about 52 books a week. A week. Well, there you go. Live 52 books a year. And what I do is take pretty much all of that information that I'm inspired by, that elicits that creative process, and make my podcast episodes and most of my writing about. And that uncovers the truth that there's nothing new. There's nothing new out there, right? I was just talking to someone this morning, and they reminded me that this concept of talking about the things that make you go comes from the CNC Music Factory. Right. But here I am thinking that I have this genius idea of saying, right. But I have to give that credit to the CNC Music Factory. So in any case, let's get started with this. And I want to share with you something that I did this morning, just quickly, part of the exposure therapy. As most of you know, I wear my glasses all the time, my special glasses that have no lenses. And I recognized that I was developing a comfort zone around my glasses. I don't know if you can relate to that. It's a cool thing to do, to assess yourself today, identify anything that you're comfortable with. So even though my glasses have no lenses, right? That's what makes my glasses unique, my Make Sense glasses. And if you want a pair of these, come see me at Creative Con in Chicago, and I'll be handing some of these out. But what's interesting about these glasses and the fact that they have no lenses is I can actually see better with them. And when I started to notice that I can see better with glasses that have no lenses, I know that there's this whole fun thing that I talk about how I'm in control of my perception and change the way you look at things and all that. But I can actually see better with these glasses on. So that made me realize that I was probably getting very comfortable. So I chose, because I'm a little bit sick, I chose to start today's episode off without wearing the glasses. And it made me feel very uncomfortable, which is what my goal was. So in any case, I'm going to put them on now. And another thing that's cool about wearing glasses without lenses is that this light that I have in front of me does not cause glare. And if I have an itch, I can always itch them through. But whenever someone says, why do you have no lenses in your glasses? I say, because I don't need them anymore. That's my cool answer. So let's get started. Today, we are going to do a little make sense summary of one of the all-time greatest books. My daughter just read this book, and that is A Man's Search for Meaning by the amazing Viktor Frankl. A Man's Search for Meaning by the amazing Viktor Frankl. Spelt Viktor Frankl, no E. The amazing Viktor Frankl. So we're going to make sense of this book, but first I just want to take the opportunity to say hi to some folks. I see some folks coming in here live from the Make Sense Academy. Great morning, Chris. Great morning, Lori. When I edit this episode for the podcast, it'll end up being probably about 20 minutes or so. So, if you want to follow the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast and get these episodes nice and tight and concise, that'll be the cleaned up version. But here you're going to get the mistakes and everything like that. And also ask questions if you want, and I can interact with you, because if you say something in the comments, then I can see it, whether you're watching on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, or whatever. So let's get this started. So we're going to take a look at this book, and this book is life-changing. And I'm just going to share a little bit of information on the book and a little bit of an intro, and then we'll get started. So you're going to get the highlights of A Man's Search for Meaning. I'm going to make sense of some things. I'm going to correlate it to some real-time stuff that people go through, because most of the stuff that we're going through in life, we're not even aware of, because we're sleepwalking through life. That's why we say this is the uprising of the sleepwalking masses. So here's what I say. Why is it, so this is a question, why is it that some people, and I don't know which one you are, rise above suffering while others stay stuck? This is one of the most curious perceptions and observations I have of human beings. Not that it happens, but why? I'm very, very curious to know why some people rise up above suffering and pass through adversity and all of that, and some just apparently choose to stay stuck there as victims. What if I told you that how you interpret life, this is very interface response system. What if I told you that how you interpret life's events determines whether you remain trapped or break free from the pain? So what do I say all the time? If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So the next time that you feel the pain and suffering and being a victim of circumstance, if you could just pull that out, that sentence, what if I told you that it's how you interpret life's events that determines whether you remain trapped in the pain or break free? So in today's episode, this book is a slice of delicious pizza for somebody that's trapped in the pain. You're gonna shift. This is some really good shift. So in today's episodes, we're going to dive deep into Viktor Frankl's legendary book, A Man's Search for Meaning, and uncovering how finding meaning in suffering can change your life forever. You're going to notice in this episode that you have a lot of anecdotes that you use for yourself in this idea of like learning from our, challenges and mistakes and adversities. A lot of that stuff comes from this amazing man. Plus, I'm also going to share Frankl's revolutionary method that a lot of people don't know about unless you've read the book, called Logotherapy. And I'm also going to include a unique technique that is like a practical application that you can go around and play with right away, called Paradoxical Intention. This stuff is yummy. So these things are going to help you basically reclaim and claim control of your responses and find purpose in any situation. And it's important that you hear what I said, any. even yours, even the one that you currently think is special and unique. So let's dive in. So quick welcome to the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. This podcast, as a reminder, covers topics that expand human consciousness and performance. On the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, we acknowledge that it's who you are that determines how well what you do works, and that perception, like Guinness beer, is an acquired taste. It's subjective. It's subjective by nature. So when you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at begin to change. Welcome to the uprising of the sleepwalking masses, and welcome to the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. So what is this book about? Let's get right into it. This book, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So the meaning of life, here's a quote from him. The meaning of life is to give life meaning. Ooh, ooh. The meaning of life is to give life meaning. What a goal to set, right? And that's not something you have to wait for. You can start giving things meaning right now by just asking the right questions. So Viktor Frankl, who's actually a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, and a lot of people don't know the extent to his suffering, but he endured 3 years in 4 different Nazi camps. Now, when you move from one Nazi camp, Nazi death camp, to another, that means that whatever roots you had set up for survival, whether you've lost your family, you had friends or anything like that, you lose them. So it's like constant. And, the most, well-known camp he spent time in was Auschwitz. And that was just a terrible place. Losing his parents, his wife, and most of his loved ones immediately. So he was forced to comply with horrific circumstances, like everyone else, that were imposed on him by the SS, the Nazi soldiers, as well as the so-called, as he called them, capos, which is like a mafia word, which were the prisoners in these death camps that received special privileges in return for helping the soldiers. I guess we would call them the sellouts or something like that. But Frankl shares that those capos, isn't this ironic? And the reason why I'm setting the stage like this is because when you look at your current suffering, the things that you're trying to find meaning in, it's important to understand the extent of his suffering before I teach you some of his stuff. Because he was saying not only all of the stories about the Nazi soldiers, but he said the capos, these actual Jewish prisoners that were in the camps that were given special privileges, were actually even more sadistic on many levels than the Nazis. Isn't that amazing? Like, how low can you go? So if we look at our lives in society today, here's an insight that I came up with. If we look at our lives in society today, and this would be a self-reflection for you, we see a lot of people walking around trying to find their own meaning and purpose in a world that seems to be plotting against them. This is what it means to be a victim of circumstance, especially when you're a victim of the universe itself. A world that seems to be plotting against them and leaving them behind. I mean, the world is moving fast. It's very, very common that people are trying to figure out their identity. They're being left behind. So one could not even remotely compare the struggles of the modern day Westerner, right? That's you and I, with that or those that suffered the terrible, realities in the Nazi death camps. Oddly enough, we do. And that's an important point to make. Oddly enough, we find people walking around today in this day and age with the same existential questions that the people in the death camps had to have. Remember, these people were trying to find like a reason to just get through the day. And there's some interesting observations Frankl had of that. Isn't it interesting to note how we're doing the same thing, the same existential questions, and we have similar reasons for giving up on life altogether, which unfortunately we're seeing over and over again, right? Identity crisis, and people just saying there's no reason to live. So when we're trapped in what Viktor Frankl calls an existential vacuum, and an existential vacuum is this place where there's no light at the end of the tunnel, right? Because all you're sucking in this existential vacuum is what is going on the outside, rather than practicing something like gratitude or finding the meaning in just the simple things. What awaits people in that existential vacuum is nothing but despair. And you see that, and you might be experiencing that yourself. So the good news is that we're going to give you some good shift today, and you're going to just be able to reframe and refocus. So despite the unimaginable suffering, he made a profound discovery while he was there. Everything can be taken from a man or a woman, but one thing. I love that statement. Everything can be taken from a person, but one thing. It just reminds me that everything does not include the one thing. The last of all human freedoms, as he explains it, and that is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way. Great morning, Kathy. So think about that for a second. Can that be taken away? You could create the perception that you have no choice. I have no choice in the matter, right? But do you ever lose the choice to choose how you will look at something your way? So Frankl observed that those that survived in these death camps were not necessarily the strongest or the most resilient, but those who could find meaning in their suffering. And this is the lesson. God, I was so proud of my daughter for reading this book, because what a great life lesson to teach your kids. We can teach our kids that, you're going to fail forward and the obstacle is the way and all that. But you know what? When you're in the obstacle or in the failure or the setback or the letdown, it's hard to remember that lesson, right? But if you can teach a kid to search for meaning, to find the lesson and things like that, almost as an investigator or a detective of meaning, that's a great, great tool. So as a doctor, and here's an example, Frankl found meaning and purpose in providing care for his fellow inmates. So he's in there getting tortured just like everyone, thinking every day is his last. But what he did was he took on the role, because he had a skill set, as everyone does, to nurture and care for his fellow inmates. In fact, in his book, you learn about a story. This is about commitment. In fact, there was an opportunity, a great opportunity for Frankl to escape the death camps. It was well thought out and it was well executed, and Frankl was in on it. But Frankl chose to stay behind because his patients needed his care, which he was willing to die for. Talk about finding meaning. So look at your life right now. Do you have something that means so much to you? Like for me, it's my children, right? Being their father, that you would die for it. Because that's all I need to go on. What about you? So Frankl noted a common characteristic on the other hand, and this is the other people that he saw collapse, and fall prey to the harsh conditions as victims, which I would assume is pretty easy to do. He noticed that they had a sense of identifying there being nothing more to expect from their life, which naturally was followed by death. His experience led him to develop something called logotherapy, and this is powerful. And that is a psychological approach that teaches that the search for meaning is the primary force of driving human behavior. Now, one thing that's fun about the live is that right now, just the realities of doing a podcast and a live show, as a dad that lives in a house with a daughter that has no school today, 2 cats and a puppy and a wife that works from home and a mother-in-law, right? Right now, outside the door, you can't hear it, but right now outside the door, my cat is crying and wants to come in, but she's going to have to wait. She's a darling little cat. So that's part of the live portion. You just kind of came into my home. So let's talk about Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, and I call it healing through meaning. So what is logotherapy? He developed it, Frankl developed it, and it was a form of existential therapy that helps individuals overcome suffering by discovering purpose and meaning in their lives. So this is what you can start to play with. Unlike Freud's psychoanalysis, which suggests that human behavior is actually driven by the pursuit of pleasure. And we get very confused with that, right? We run from pain and we seek pleasure. So that's Freud's. Frankl argues that, and he says that the deepest human drive is the need to find meaning. Now, why would this be so fascinating to me? When I first learned about logotherapy, I had already been working for years on my book, Makes Sense, and this whole concept and the interface response system. So when I learned about this and his explanation, it further validated my theory, which is very similar, that all humans have this deep desire and intrinsic motivation to understand and make sense of things. So if you go back to my story and how I survived, the pending doom of suicide and darkness and many, many trials and tribulations in my life, the way that I got through those was to find meaning, or as I say, to make sense of things. And once I experienced the light from that darkness that I was in, I made a decision to never go back and spend the rest of my life helping others make sense of things. So that's my work. So there's 3 core tenets to Frankl's logotherapy, and here they are. Life has meaning in all circumstances, and it's important to take a stand there. All circumstances. Even in suffering, we can find purpose. And that's why it's important to know his story, because his suffering is very hard to match. Okay? I know that emotional suffering is tragic. I've experienced it. But if you know about Viktor Frankl, you're gonna be able to reflect on that. So life has meaning in all circumstances. The second tenet of logotherapy, our primary motivation is to find meaning. Important to understand that. The search for meaning drives us, not pleasure or power. So if you ever find yourself driven by pleasure or power, what that's insinuating is not that that's a bad thing, but you might want to pause on that and ask yourself, what is it that I really, really want? And a great way to reframe that is I always ask people, in the last 10 minutes of your life, what will you look back on in your life and evaluate as a metric to determine if you lived a good life? You'll be thinking, did I make my time count? You will not think about your money. Maybe you'll think about the legacy you're leaving behind for your kids, but you will be looking at the footprint that you leave behind. So I just want to remind all of you right now that you are creating and developing that footprint right now. Perhaps that will change the way you look at this day. So the third tenet of logotherapy, we have the freedom to find meaning. You're allowed to question and dispute and contemplate everything and anyone and anything to find meaning. No matter what happens, we can choose how we respond to life's challenges. This is the whole premise of the interface response system that I teach. So let's talk about how logotherapy can help you overcome suffering. Frankl believed that suffering, and a lot of people talk about suffering. I love Eckhart Tolle's stuff on suffering. By the way, I'm going to provide you with resources, obviously his book. This is not a way of bypassing the book. There's no way that you can embrace this book without reading it. This is just me hooking you up for the week. So the book and some cool resources that I found, some videos and interviews of Viktor Frankl, they will be in the notes of the podcast. So Frankl believed that suffering becomes unbearable only when it's meaningless. Oh, I love that so much, right? If I make you go do something, you're going to suffer. But as soon as you find a reason to believe that it has meaning, the suffering decreases. If we can assign meaning to our hardships, we gain the ability to endure them and even transform them into sources of strength. The Stoics spoke a lot about this stuff, right? Voluntary discomfort. So there's a big difference between discomfort and voluntary discomfort. So if I force you to go into a cold plunge, you're going to suffer more than if you voluntarily do it. So that's the value of voluntary discomfort. You can actually become a source of your strength. So Frankl found meaning in his suffering through several key perspectives. So here's how he found meaning. This is the question everybody asks. How did he do it? How did he do it? How did he not set up camp and be a victim of that like most people? And I'm not putting those people down. I don't know how I would have responded. I hope that I would respond like Viktor Frankl. But so here's how he found meaning. Finding purpose in the pain. He had to find some purpose in the pain. He saw the suffering as a test of his ability to practice what he believed, that even in the most inhumane conditions, one can maintain dignity, hope, and inner freedom. He took it on as a challenge, like training, right? Like doing push-ups to build your muscles. Second, serving others, another meaning he found. Rather than succumbing to despair, he focused on helping other prisoners find strength and will to live, demonstrating that meaning could be found in service to others, even in a place designed to strip all meaning away. He took a stand against what they were trying to do and just strip him of all of his dignity and meaning. He created it on his own, and nobody could take that away from him, and nobody can take it away from you. 3, mental escape and future vision. Frankl imagined himself giving lectures about his experiences. He had a future destination that was attractive, helping future generations learn about these atrocities and how to manage them. This visualization gave him a reason to endure, reinforcing the idea that suffering has a meaning when tied to a greater purpose. We see that all the time. This is just delicious. The fourth one, love as a source of strength. He spoke a lot about the power of love. His thoughts of his wife, Tilly, and the love that they shared became a source of endurance. Even though he did not know her fate, and unfortunately she died, the love he felt was enough to sustain him. He just basked in the glory of his love for his wife without having her around and not even knowing if she was alive. And it showed him that meaning can be found in connections and transcend physical circumstances. The fifth and final one that helped him find meaning, choosing how to suffer. He claimed control of choosing how to suffer. Frankl realized that suffering itself is neutral. This is a challenging thing for you to consider. And its weight depends on the meaning that we assign to it. If one sees suffering as random and pointless, it becomes unbearable. But if one sees it as part of the greater journey, this is a big thing with me. When I get scared, like I always do with public speaking, or when I go through tough times, and I go through them every day, and I can look at them as a necessary ingredient for the recipe that I'm trying to construct, it changes everything. That's the idea of changing the way you look at things. That's what the interface response system's for. So it can become a catalyst for growth and inner strength. Interesting to look at suffering as something that can be a catalyst for growth and inner strength. So Frankl often spoke a lot about the attitude we take towards unavoidable suffering. This is a big one. Evaluate things that you can see are unavoidable suffering. And it plays a major role in discovering the meaning of our life and circumstances. So in my own observation, one of the hardest obstacles for someone to overcome is their sense of entitlement in choosing to look at their circumstances from the perspective as a victim. Grab that. Infused with the cognitive bias that we form around it to look at their circumstances and entertain the alternate side. They won't allow themselves to see the other side because they've tethered themselves to their circumstances, right? The other side of the situation, they set up camp below the line of responsibility, and the responsibility they have is that of the choice of how they want to look at things. It's their party, and they will cry if they want to. Now, I just want to make sure you understand I'm not poking fun or putting people down that suffer. I'm just reminding people that there's a choice. That's it. But it is your party, and you can cry if you want to. So when we find ourselves in situations we can't change, as the circumstances are beyond our control, which happens a lot, it will happen today, we're forced to change ourselves and the way that we look at things. Make sense? So that's it. That's your choice. One of the most unique techniques that he spoke about in logotherapy is something called paradoxical intention. Let me say that again for the podcast. Paradoxical intention, which teaches patients to embrace their fears instead of resisting them. This is a tool for your belt. Paradoxical intention means the counterintuitive technique, That's what he called it. It was a counterintuitive technique. Think about what intuition tells you to do. It's a counterintuitive technique for changing the way that we look at things. So when I learned about paradoxical intention, I realized where it fit into my system, and that is in the processing, assessing phase. So what is a paradox? This is an important word. A paradox, by Webster's dictionary, says that it's a statement that is seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense, yet is perhaps true, right? It's something that everything tells you is not true, but it's perhaps true. It's entertaining that word maybe. So I love to tell people when they ask me my opinion that I haven't made up my mind about anything other than that I haven't made up my mind about anything. And the reason why I practice that is because I like to look at all sides. Drives my wife crazy. So the strategy suggests that instead of trying to suppress their fears and anxieties, patients are encouraged to exaggerate them on purpose. By doing so, they take away the power and break the cycle of the fear and avoidance. We know that if we think there's a monster in the closet or under the bed and we don't face it, it gets bigger and stronger. So this acknowledges that our fears, worries, and concerns only have the power that we give them by labeling them as such: fears, worries, and concerns. So here's some examples. If someone has insomnia due to anxiety about not sleeping, and I've been there, they are encouraged to try to stay awake as long as possible instead of forcing sleep. That would be a paradoxical intention. If someone fears blushing in public and getting blotches on their neck, I've been there, they're instructed to actually try to blush and try to elicit sweat and blotches on your neck, even more when they feel it coming. If someone suffers, as another example, in public speaking and anxiety, that was me, they are told to deliberately try to suffer or make a mistake on purpose. This was a big one. When I got to the place where I let go of my worry and concern of making mistakes, I was free, as I feel right now speaking to you or whoever, letting go of everything. And the way that I did that is I allowed myself to make mistakes. I actually made it part of it. I could at any time just make a funny sound or just blah, right? Which I can edit. You'll notice that I say right a lot. So that those are the mistakes that I know that I'm trying to not say. So that's a wonderful freeing moment. So a more subtle example of this is the practice of allowing yourself to even entertain the other side of your fear by saying this. This is a great statement to write down and remember. What would it look like if that which I fear became that which I desire? Now, if you look at that and say, that's foolish, I would never do that. Well, remember, that's a choice. We get to choose our hard, right? By embracing, there's the right. By embracing the fear instead of resisting it, the emotional pressure dissolves and the anxiety often disappears. So Frankl talked a lot about the space between the stimulus and the response, and that was the key to freedom. So his most famous quote was one that said this: between the stimulus and the response, something that happens, the happening, the event, and your response to it is the space that he's referring to. In that space is our power to choose our responses, and in our response lies growth and freedom. So this is where true transformation takes place, in the space. So one of the tools that I love to hand people is a system of getting into the space, but you have to practice it. So when something painful or challenging happens, whether it's trauma, loss, or betrayal, our natural reaction is to feel anger, fear, and confusion. That's the intuitive, natural, normal reaction. But if we can learn to put a pause on those feelings, we acknowledge those thoughts and feelings. It's thought management, right? We put a pause on them and sit in that space that comes right on the other side of the pause. What we do is we gain the ability to respond with wisdom and logic and rationale rather than react impulsively. You see, the interface response system is a system of acknowledging the whole impulsive nature of our response system, and also acknowledging where it came from our mother, father, teacher, preacher, right? So if you can acknowledge that, it validates the idea of putting it on pause. So this whole system he talks about directly aligns and validates the 4-step process that I call the interface response system. As a quick reminder, it starts off with perception, taking note of the program nature of your brain. The second step would be, based on that validation of the program nature of your brain, pausing. That's cognitive distancing, and that's creating space between the stimulus and your reaction. So there's the validation. The third one is process, making an assessment while in that space and giving something meaning that supports growth or doesn't, identifying if we control it or not. Does it matter or not? Is it about them or me, right? And we talk about the sorting filter in that space. And then the fourth step is what we call proceed. So these are the 4 Ps, taking action in a way that aligns with our highest self, which we get to choose, which you don't have to be right about. It could just be right at that time. So step 3, processing and assessing of the IRS, would be where you'd give something meaning in connection with what Frankl was teaching. So here's some practical action steps as we come to a close, how to apply Frankl's teachings today and every day. So what I would do with practical action steps is I would write them down as things to play with and practice today. So the first one, practice the space between stimulus and response. Practice saying, And remember, is spelled HMMM, which stands for I hear you, but I haven't made my mind up about it yet. So that's how, when you hear me say I haven't made up my mind, I'm practicing the space between. I'm checking everything, even things that I know for sure I'm right, especially those things. So the second practical action step, assign meaning to past struggle. This is a great one. We're trying to resolve childhood trauma. So another way of doing that would be to assign meaning. Take a painful experience and ask, what did I learn from that? Shift your focus from what happened to me to how did it happen for me? Difficult, easier said than done, but better done than just said. 3, use logotherapy to find meaning in hardship. Identify how you can grow from a challenge rather than be defeated by it. Just play with it. Ask yourself, how can this experience make me stronger? I love that question. 4, use paradoxical intention to reframe your fear. Next time you feel anxious, lean into the feeling rather than run from it. If you fear failure, try to fail. If you're out there trying to, and you're nervous about talking to members of the opposite sex, or you're looking for a partner, just go out there with the intention of failing 10 times a night. Rewrite your identity through meaning. Rewrite your story. Rewrite your identity through meaning. Stop seeing yourself as a victim of the past. Instead, try and practice seeing yourself as someone who grew, learned, and overcame. Rewrite the story. Just pick up a pen and rewrite the story. And you can just start off by saying, what if it looked like this? So here are my final dragon thoughts. Meaning is the key to freedom. The philosophy of Viktor Frankl could perhaps be summarized like this. Finding something to live and even die for transforms a meaningless, hopeless existence into a life worth living, regardless of any circumstance. Hence, Frankl, in the book, Frankl quotes Nietzsche. I think it's Nietzsche or Nietzsche. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Now, when you hear these things, you go, makes sense, but it's in the application. So re-listen to this. When the podcast comes out, I'll put it in the notes, the transcript, go over those practical action steps and put them into play. Life isn't about what happens to you, my friend. It's about how you make sense of it and how you show up. Viktor Frankl's greatest lesson is that even in the worst circumstances, we can choose our response. And that choice determines whether we stay trapped in the suffering or break free, and we break free through meaning. Nobody can take this power of your choice away in any situation, and they can't take away your perspective. You can just allow them to have a say in it. Nobody can take that away from you. So the next time life throws you a challenge, remember, you are not powerless. You can choose how to respond, and you can find meaning. And in that meaning, you will find your freedom. Make sense? Love and appreciate you all. This was a fun one. I love this book. I would run to the store, and this is probably somehow squeaking into my top 5. My daughter read it and it made total sense to her, and it's just helped her reevaluate everything. So go right out there and get this book. I'll have the link to the book in my show notes and a lot of other cool stuff. Remember, this podcast is sponsored by the Make Sense Academy, our private community where we take people that are just simply going through life and we help them start growing through life. And also you can subscribe to my free Substack, my Make Sense Substack, for your daily dose of consciousness around the things that make you go, So love and appreciate you. And remember, if you learned something today, give it away, because it's only that way that it will stay. Love and appreciate you, and enjoy your day. Hey, that was a new rhyme. Bye-bye now.